Hello everyone, this is Jotto, and welcome to the Blackrock Mountain set review. And with me, as always, is my partner in crime, Dapperatchik.
Hi guys.
It's been a while since I've had you on one of my videos. It's been, what, 3 months since GVG? 4?
Yeah, I haven't been playing that much last time recently, but I'm really excited for the new Blackrock stuff. And
We have
yeah,
31 cards this time, not 120.
yep, that's going to be somewhat of a relief because last time was quite grueling. And I've got my blanket. I'm ready. Let's get into it.
As opposed to 6 hours of recording, so probably be... Actually, I'm not going to try a rough estimate because I'm always wrong. So anyway, let's start with some slight card changes before we get into the actual cards. Now, this is basically just wording changes. They changed Arcane Missiles and Avenging Wrath, which are both missile-type spells or effects from enemy characters to all enemies. This is basically supposed to put it in tune with Dr. Boom, not Dr. Boom, with Goblin Blast Mage to make it less really annoying and just confusing and OCD triggery. So yeah, they got rid of that. The
Yeah,
other
it's
thing,
to see if they change the wording on like so things like Whirlwind, where
where it just says all
so
minions. Well, it
it says all minions in
says,
capitals, right?
and now I'm
Where
guessing it might not.
Whereas if you look at things like what's the new warrior card called Revenge, it doesn't. So
Okay.
that's another.
We
Yeah,
can talk.
there's a few of those inconsistencies running around.
There's still a ton of them, yeah, but at least they're clarifying some of them.
Mm.
Now the other one is Ysera. Now this was changed from draw a dream card to add a dream card to your hand. This is basically to clarify the lack of an interaction with another card in the set, which says whenever you draw a card.
Right.
So yeah, dream cards do not count. Because they're added directly to your hand, they're not drawn from your deck. That's basically the thing they're trying to clarify there. Again, much appreciated, and hope they do more of this to make it less confusing.
I mean, it's the same with any sort of new game. So if you go back into the history of Magic or something, there'll be a mechanic that's introduced and it's
Some of
worded
the
in a kind of
wording,
fuzzy way, and then
yeah, some of the wording on old Magic cards will literally send you to sleep halfway through. You just get lost. So yeah, that's
yeah.
actually a fair point. They're not as bad as some of the older card games when they start wording issues, but there still are wording issues that they're trying to fix, is the point. But anyway, so without further ado, let's get on to the actual cards. Now we're going to start with the 3-drop Blackwing Technician. It is a 3 mana 2/4 common, which is relevant for Arena and also for Golden Crafting. Battle Cry. If you're holding a dragon, gain +1/+1. Now this is the first time we saw this mechanic along with Wrecked Blackhand. Yeah, no, Rend Blackhand.
Correct.
But basically, it's the if you're holding a dragon, do something mechanic. This is supposed to be one of the the marquee showing off the mechanic type cards, and it's a 3-drop. So, what do you think?
I think it's a really interesting card. It's quite different to the kind of tribal synergies we've seen before with like mechs and stuff, because this sort of instead of rewarding you for playing dragons, it rewards you for having a dragon in your hand, which is very different because it doesn't force you to push the sort of tribal synergy aspect of having board control, swarming the board and stuff. Um, so the important things to think about with this card are how good is it when it's a 2/4? How good is it when it's a 3/5? How often is it going to be a 3/5? And
Yeah. When
how
it's a
hard do you have to try to make it?
3/5, it's absurd. Like, we saw this on the release stream, we were expecting it, but we saw it on the release stream, and there was just a game where between two players they had 3 Blackwing Technicians, and they were just dwarfing everything else on the board. Because they are
Yeah.
absolutely huge when they're activated.
So I mean, you
When...
can
Yeah.
think about Spider Tank, right? Which is the kind of standard benchmark for a 3 these days. When it was released, people wondered, are people going to use this just because it's big as a 3-drop?
And they did.
And the answer was not really. I mean, it doesn't get played in non-mech decks at all. Um,
Yeah, that's true, actually.
but how much better is a 3/5 than a 3/4 on turn 3? Well, dramatically. It's
Yeah.
that big 5 attack. It's a big 5 health cutoff where, so Spider Tank, they can coin True Silver or it gets eviscerated and then you're just really sad.
Oh, you
Uh,
can't even truce over this thing. That's actually a big deal.
yeah, Death's Bite. Yeah, it's a really big deal, and so it's way more likely to get that good early thing where you just play it. It's got 3 attacks, so it can trade down into smaller minions really effectively. Um, And yeah, so it's kind of like a mid-rangey card, right? Because there aren't very many cheap dragons, and if you play it
Yeah.
with cheap dragons, then the cheap dragons will be out of your hand before you play this. So it's more a card that you're going to play in a type of deck where you actually you're fine with keeping like the hungry dragon, the
Yeah.
5-drop dragon, in order to make sure that
The
this goes off.
aggro draws with dragon decks are going to be more akin to like Fast Druid, where they just go like Harvest Golem or Shade into like Druid of the Claw of Innervate or
Mm.
something, and they just beat you down, but they're still playing a mid-range deck. It's not an aggro deck. But just something before I forget, Blackwing Technician actually has a sort of slight nerf to two cards, which isn't people really haven't thought about from what I can tell. The first is Harvest Golem over Spider Tank because Blackwing Technician does not trade with Harvest Golem, whereas it does trade with Spider Tank unaided, is the point. And the other thing is that Blackwing Technician will trade with a piloted Shredder.
Well, that's actually a really good point. I hadn't really thought about that. The Blackrock Technician really plays on the Shredder because it's so horrible playing a Shredder. In the same way that Sludge Belcher is a really good response to the Shredder because it trades so well with it.
And also why it sucks to play Sludge Belcher into a Loetheb.
Exactly. Um, so Blackwing Technician is good because that 5 health is so important. Because nothing that early in the game has 5 health, and so um, it will be really good. However, there's the caveat that we're kind of analysing this in the context of
When it's activated,
the
that's the
metagame
point as well.
as it exists now. But there's going to be some changes, of course, and definitely it's the case that that 5 health cutoff might not be as important because there are new cards being released like Hungry Dragon and
Which has 5 attack.
The Shaman card that I can never remember the name of.
The
Which,
small fire elemental is what I'm starting to call it.
yeah, which trade much better against the Blackwing Technician.
Yeah, that's true.
And so the real question I think is because again you can't, the other reason you can't analyze this card in a vacuum is because this card is going to go into a dragon deck. It's going to go into a deck that can afford to play a certain number of dragons, and we do have some stats on.
Yeah,
How,
I'll bring that up actually. So we've got a nifty Reddit post in the background here, which
thanks
shows.
to user Lychee.
Is it called? Yeah, Lychee. So, or slight. Anyway, so what this table shows is if you mulligan everything apart from Blackwing Technician, and you play it on turn 3. So I guess if you're going second, you can play it on turn 2, but then you'll also had an extra card to see and mulligan, so it's probably roughly the same. So the point is that amount of dragons in your deck to chance of buffing Blackwing Technician. Now the low estimate is 3 dragons in your deck for 44%, which is not acceptable. However, if you have 9 dragons in your deck, which would be impressive, then you have a close to 90% chance of getting it on turn 3. Now personally, I would say that the mech decks currently with like Blast Mage and things like that, if their mechs aren't removed, probably have something like 75%. I want to say because I want to say maybe 1 in every 4 or 5 games. If your stuff is if your stuff isn't removed, you still have the what I like to call goblins and gnomes draw. You just don't throw any mechs.
Well, that's interesting. I would have thought it was actually quite a bit lower than that. But so this math is all maths is all very sketchy because it's assuming that you have a Blackwing Technician and that you didn't mulligan away some other dragons, and of course you will want to mulligan away some dragons if you're playing like your Sarah or whatever random.
You're not going to
stuff.
mulligan things like Hungry Dragon if you have Blackwing Tech, 'cause that's an amazing curve, as we'll get to, because he's a 4-drop. But things like Azure Drake is a bit sketchy. Things like the higher drop dragons you're not going to want to keep. So
I think it's probably worth keeping somewhat subcard card just because Blackwing Technician does ensure that you're very unlikely to fall
I
behind.
would say if it's
Obviously,
a 5-drop, I would keep it because it's so big on its turn that it'll keep you stabilized for a turn or 2.
yeah, I mean, it very much depends on the matchup, of course. So against Warrior, you're very happy to keep, say 5 drops as like a rogue or whatever. Whereas against the Face Hunter, you definitely don't want to keep an Azure Drake.
Yeah, so I mean that's matchups, and the point is that this is the maths that we're going off, and this really only applies to Blackwing Technician because a lot of the other, if you're holding a dragon, things are more expensive, which means that you need less dragons to make them work. So this is the turn 3 thing.
Yeah, the other interesting question about Blackwing Technician is, again, what decks is it going to see play in? And that very much depends on the where the other dragons are the best,
I would
which we'll talk.
say anything with like
I mean,
5 dragons or more can run
right.
Blackwing
So
tech.
yeah. So the question is which decks are going to be those? And I think well, obviously the biggest answer is Paladin because
They get a
they get
dragon.
an amazing class specific dragon.
We'll get there though, we'll get there. That's a separate video. We're doing these in 2 separate videos where we're doing neutrals now and then we'll do class cards
Um,
tomorrow.
and in Paladin, actually, the Black Tree Technician is a bit kind of awkward because you already have your three slot is already kind of a bit clogged
It
because of
is.
Muster,
We have to see
Aldor.
some of the other dragons first before we go. Because I mean, spoiler season did have a few, but it didn't show money of the class cards and just the general synergies. The other thing is we do have this really really long like thing that's been designed here with all the dragon stats for Hungry Dragon and Dragonkin Sorcerer and things like that, which is relevant because those are the 2 cards we're talking about next. So Hungry Dragon, 4 mana, 5/6 dragon.
Before we move on, Jotto,
Yeah, go
shall
for
we
it.
just have a quick sort of verdict to sum up on exactly how good Black Tree Technician is going to be?
I think it's very good. One of the best cards in the set, like top 5,
Um,
maybe.
I'm a little bit less.
Okay, one of the best neutrals in the set.
I'm a little bit kind of less bullish than you. I think even if you're already running like a bunch of dragons for other reasons, such as the Paladin class card, I think you're probably going to want to run Blackwing Technician. But I think it does require you
3/5
to make
is
some.
huge,
Yeah,
man.
3/5 is insane, but with the caveat that it doesn't trade as well with some of the new 4 drops as it does with the existing ones, and um, it's possible that you won't get it off, in which case a 2/4 for 3 is fairly
But
bad.
the new 4
And
drops are class specific or dragons, which means that there'll be a mirror anyway.
um, that's true. That's actually very true. That's something to think about. That so if something makes a card weaker, but that weakness is only in, for example, the mirror, it might in fact be a
It
buff to that
balances
class
out.
of card.
Yeah.
So, for example, I remember Life Coach saying that the Flare nerf was actually a buff to Hunters because playing Flare basically just causes you to burn a mana in all the matchups that aren't Hunter v Hunter. And so not having to play Flare anymore actually increases
It increases the power of the deck
it increases the
overall,
power of the
which
deck
is
against
weird.
all other decks, and obviously the Hunter Mirror is still going to stay roughly 50-50, which I thought was very interesting.
Roughly
Um,
50/50. It kind of is 50/50.
well, I mean,
It's like
it
hard not to
depends
be.
on what cards you're playing, and obviously Face Hunter is better
Yeah.
against Midrange Hunter.
But anyway, so yeah, basically the point is that the time when it's weakest is probably in the mirror match, which is negligible compared to non-mirror match, because the mirror match is obviously more even, partly because it's a similar deck.
But yeah, the 3/5 size is just so incredibly good at trading with
It's the
other
biggest
stuff around.
3 drop in the
Saints.
game, basically, that doesn't have a
You know when you
drawback.
play it that you're going to have the biggest thing on the board, and that's huge in Hunter.
And then your opponent
Um,
goes Mukla.
well, then you go double banana. And
Yeah, you kill it anyway. So anyway, moving on from the Blackwing Technician, Hungry Dragon and Dragonkin Sorcerer are the next 2, which are both 4-drop dragons. So we've got Hungry Dragon, 4 mana, 5/6 common. That's a dragon. It does have a drawback, but that's huge. All right. Battle Cry. Summon a random 1-cost minion for your opponent. Now, before I make a comment about this, I do have my nifty dandy stats thing, which shows the average for getting 0 attack and health, basically 0 to 3 attack and 1 to 4 health, and it shows some of the weird ones that can mess you up. So I did calculate this briefly, and I did figure out that it's roughly the average attack of 1-drops is 1 1/3 or something, and it's shown here where you've got almost 60%
yeah.
chance to get 1 attack. There's a bit on the 0, and then the rest is basically 2 with a bit on the 3. And then health-wise, it's mostly 1 with a little bit on 2, and then a bit on 3, and almost nothing on 4. It's basically just Shield Bearer. Now,
So the
yeah,
important. So this is a card that's quite difficult to evaluate, like Piloted Shredder was when we were first talking about it after it got revealed, because you need to have quite a lot of experience to kind of get a feel for exactly how good the random 1-cost minion is for your opponent. And the thing about Hungry Dragon is, like, the worst case scenario is they get a fairly good 3-drop,
Flame Imp.
sorry, a fairly good 1-drop, a Flame Imp or a Mana Worm that they then use to take out your Hungry Dragon, and it's basically, a 5/4 or 5/3 or whatever. which is
Not
you know
amazing.
pretty terrible compared to a Shredder or a Yeti. But the important thing about these statistics, it gives you an idea of if you have a rogue weapon equipped, how likely am I to be able to just hit the thing and kill it before they can do anything with it,
Or a Blackwing
and,
Technician, which will pretty much
or a
always
Blackwing
kill the
Technician.
one drop.
Yeah, it's pretty important to. So the thing about Hungry Dragon is if you have board control, and particularly if you have a lot of attacks that are available to kind of clear the board after you play it, then it makes it a lot better. So the decks that Hungry Dragon is going to see a lot of play in are
Rogue.
less things like one of the reasons that Dragon Druid kind of seems somewhat superficially attractive, just because the idea of playing like huge minions on curve is very druidy, and you can innovate things, and innovate Blackwing Technician is pretty disgusting, um, for example. But one of the things that Druid is really bad against is just when there's um, boards that are flooded with tiny, crappy minions. That's why the Druid against matchup against things like Hunter and Mech Mage is so bad.
Yeah.
Um, and consequently, the Hungry Dragon is better in decks that have the ability to control the board early on and be able to play this 5/6, not give you anything to deal with it, and then because trying to spend enough removal to kill a 5/6 in turn 4 is pretty horrendous.
It's pretty
So
hard,
instead, you're going
yeah.
to have to play your Sludge Belcher into it. Um,
Your
your
Loatheb. Have
Belcher,
fun with that.
and you're going to have an exceptionally bad time. Um,
Even
because that's the
Shredder
important thing.
is not a
That
good play into
um,
this. It's
yeah,
okay.
and especially if they have removal from the Shredder.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, the Hungry Dragon is just this huge problem because there's no way that you don't get destroyed by this if they manage to play it without. Uh,
Like,
you know,
basically, if they get rid of the drawback with their hero power, if it's Rogue, for
yeah.
example, or if they're playing Shaman and they have, like, really cheap spells, just things like that, if they manage to get
So
rid of the one drop, then you're in trouble.
yeah, if you have to burn like a spell on the one drop, then it's obviously fairly bad. But so I think the classes that Hungry Dragon is going to be best in, like I said, are the ones that can remove the four drop, the one drop really efficiently.
Yeah, like Warrior,
So
Fire
one,
War Axe with
um,
Blackwing Tech Hungry Dragon, kill their 2 drop, kill the Hungry
yeah,
Dragon one off.
Warrior is good because you have the weapons, and also because you have so for example, suppose you have the whirlwind effect from the death spike kicking around, or maybe it's turn 6, you can taskmaster the minion that's about 50/50 to have 1 health.
Yeah.
But I think the problem with Warrior is you don't really, you're not desperate to play the 4 drop on curve. So the decks that I think where a really strong 4 drop are very useful, and that are good at dealing with what comes out of it are Rogue and Paladin. Because Rogue obviously have the dagger, so if it's a 1 health guy that's not Argent Squire, you can just play the Hungry Dragon and then stab the guy that comes out, and that's the most efficient way of killing it
Yeah.
without spending any mana or cards on that turn.
Muster for
So you
Battle will
can
take it
actually
out as well, and
yeah.
that's on
And the other thing
curve.
about Paladin, you have Muster for Battle, so you've got the Light's Justice to stab it if it's a 1 health guy. You've got various ways of killing it if even if it's a flame imp, you can just hit it and trade 1 guy in. Um, there's various horrendous things that can happen to you. Like you give them Mage and Mana Worm, or you give them Mech Deck and Cogmaster. They get a web spin and it gets them a high main. But and that's something to think about. Like there's quite hard variance in this card. Like Shredder,
On the
sometimes we'll just
on
lose
the
to
flip,
Doomsayer.
yeah, you would. On the flip side, though, there's things like Zombie Chow that could save you. there's there's some really atrocious 1 drops. So there is a bad side to this, but I think the main thing to look at this versus Shredder is that the differences between 1 drops is less than the differences between 2 drops. So you can more accurately predict what kind of minion you're going to be facing, and the highest percentage that it's probably going to be either going to have 1 attack or 1 health, basically, almost all the time. With the exception of things like,
Yeah.
in fact, very few exceptions. There's like Flame Imp, Zombie Chow, and that's almost it with the things that have more than 1 both attack and health.
that's kind of there's 2 points I want to make in response to that. One is that the board that you want to have to deal with a one attack minion is very different to the board you want to have to deal with a one health minion, obviously. So we mentioned
Yeah,
Master Baton is good,
obviously.
but when they get a mana worm,
It
the Master
sucks.
Battle is really horrible. And you wanted to have like some sort of fairly resilient minion like a Zombie Chow or a Blackwing Technician on the board to try and kill that smaller minion off.
They're different, but it's still not very
dying.
threatening, is the point.
And the thing about Piloted Shredder, right, is that the randomness means it's unpredictable, but that unpredictability hurts your opponent as well as you.
Yeah.
The strategy of dealing with the Harvest Golem is to just leave it there until you have a good way of killing both halves at the same time. But because with Shredder, you don't know whether you're going to be able to deal efficiently with what comes out until you do it.
That's true.
Whereas with the Hungry Dragon, the cost of the uncertainty is all on you. You don't know how
Yeah,
you're
it
going
is.
to
It's
deal
all
with
on it's all on you, but the sacrifice that you're making
So I
on
think
that is a
the
5, 6, or
Battle
4.
Cry is a pretty big drawback, but there are decks with a good ability to mitigate it, which will love to play this card.
Yeah, they'll love
Um,
it. It's very powerful.
just because the raw stats are so high, that is worth occasionally getting screwed over by a Dust Devil. And
Having a few technical issues on the
this
side
definitely passes the Trolldom test of evaluating a new card, which is, can this card lead to cool and awesome situations?
here. That was a bit weird. Yeah, I just had some technical difficulties in the background. But yeah, whenever we're looking at the screen, it's just occurred to me that you can't see this tiny side. It's actually just half a Hungry Dragon and a Gold Sheriff Footman, so it's fine. But you can see the majority of the stats. But anyway, anything else on Hungry Dragon, or should we move on to his 4-drop Nemesis?
I'm just waiting for when the Arena Druid innovates out a Hungry Dragon, and then the opponent gets Dust Devil and plays 4 Rock Biters on it.
Oh my god. Or just like double Cold Blood. Prep double Cold Blood.
There's some exciting things that could happen.
That'd be so funny.
Okay, so yes, let's move on.
Alright, so now, fortunately, a lot of these cards you don't need to talk about nearly as much, but yeah, the first couple you do need to.
Yeah,
Dragon can, yeah, because they're new and they're like pretty good as well. Dragonkin Sorcerer we can talk about a bit less. 4 mana, 3/5 Dragon. It's a common because they like having common dragons. Whenever you target this minion with a spell, gain +1/+1. Now, before we say anything about this, I know what the wording means. It means that when you cast something that targets it. However, if you took the wording literally,
when you hover your
yeah, infinite size dragon. But fortunately, Hearthstone isn't literal.
Didn't they originally have a minion in the game that
It
did
would
one
flip
damage
your
to a player
screen,
when they
and
hovered over it?
there was one that flipped your screen, and then there was one where if you hovered over it, it did 1 damage to you. Yeah. So dumb.
No, yeah. So Dragonkin Sorcerer, basically, this is a card that you want to use with lots of buffs, because it gets bigger when you buff it.
There's a full list of targeted spells, by the way, here. I'll just read them off quickly. Druid has Mark of Nature, Mark of the Wild, Dark Whispers, and Healing Touch, so that doesn't really count. So in terms of actual buffs, they've got 3. Paladin has the most by the looks of it. They have Blessing of Wisdom, Blessing of Might, Hand of Protection, Holy Light, Blessing of Kings, Blessed Champion, Lay on Hands. Again, some of those aren't relevant. Then we've got Cold Blood and the new card, Gang Up, which is just a target effect. Warrior has 3. Warlock has an interesting one, being Shadow Flame, which buffs it before it sacrifices it. That's an interesting interaction. Don't know if it'll ever come up, but it's interesting. And Shaman does have the Rock Biters and such. Priest may be the most relevant if they ever play this. We did actually see that in the release stream yesterday. But Power Word Shield, Velen's Chosen, very powerful on this card. Just
I think
massive
Priest
buffs.
is absolutely the class where this is going to see play if it sees play, because Priest is the class that has the best buffs. Power Word Shield is already
Very
a good card.
efficient.
It's cheap. It's low
Draws
investment.
a card.
And it's so with some buffs, the +1/+1 is not going to be that relevant. So, for example, if you Velen's Chosen, the Dragonkin Sorcerer, a 5/9 is not that different from a 6/10.
Just
Um,
remember to not target it again, because otherwise it'll get big game huntered.
that's a good point. Uh,
Your
but with a power
opponent,
shield, the difference
like,
between 3 and 4 attack is pretty big. The difference
yeah.
between 4 and 5 attack is pretty big, and this can get pretty out of hand. And the other thing, of course, is that any class can also buff it with several of the spare parts.
Yeah, the spare
Um,
parts are relevant, although some of them you can't use. Mostly it's the stat boosting ones and the taunt.
so,
Those are the ones that are relevant.
um, so having talked about it a bit, the problem with this card is that
Its competition is Hungry
so
Dragon, which doesn't help.
when you get yeah, okay, so when you target it once, it's basically a 4/6 plus the buff, and a 4/6 for 4 is obviously really good. But is it good enough to justify
An
all the
extra
investment that you made
card.
into a deck by putting in all the buffs and putting in the Dragon Kid Sorcerer? And the answer is probably not. So you can kind of compare it to Violet Teacher, where you can,
Yeah.
which is a truth.
It,
Spawns a 1/1 when you have cast any kind of spell, and you don't see that being used in Priest, for example.
yeah, but the
Uh,
difference is with Violet Teacher is that you don't need to target it. You just need to play the spells. So even then,
exactly. So Violet
that's
Teacher.
not as hard to activate.
That's a good point. So I think it's possible that this could see play in a deck where you are already running a bunch of buffs, and so for example, the priest deck that with the Gilblin Stalker and the Velen's Chosen and the Light
I
Bombs
mean,
that's been
There
doing the rounds
is
recently. The China.
there could be a dragon version of that deck because they can use Technician probably better than any other class because it has high health and they have a hero power. But they can also use Sorcerer maybe as a 4-drop, and they got a new 1-drop dragon which we'll talk about a bit later. And the main point is that they'll probably want Velen's Chosen in that list, and Power Witch will be there anyway. So maybe Sorcerer is better than Hungry Dragon. I don't know, but the point is it might be worth testing.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say, but my initial reaction is that this will see a little bit of niche play. There will be a deck at some point in which this is
That will
good,
be
but
playing it, yeah.
um, my prediction on this is that we're not going to see it more than a couple of times in serious competition
I
over the
agree.
next.
I don't think there's much to really talk about it. I mean, we did talk about the 4-drop known as Hungry Dragon, and I don't know, it just seems a bit underwhelming when put next to it.
Yeah, I mean, so I think Hungry Dragon isn't like the new generic standard for all 4 drops because
No,
I
it's
think
not.
in a lot of decks, so we talked about Druid for example, where maybe Shredder is still better than Hungry Dragon just because
It depends on how popular Technician is, really. Like, how
if you don't
popular
have
the
a really
Dragon
good
decks
way
are.
to deal with yeah, and I think that there aren't like most decks won't like even if they want to run Hungry Dragon, won't want to run enough dragons as well to make the
Technician
technician.
useful. So then, if you just want a sturdy 4-drop, Yeti or Shredder is better. And Shredder is better versus Hungry Dragon than Yeti, but then worse versus Technician. That's good to note, by the way. Because some did run Yeti instead of Shredder, or one of
Um,
each
I
before, and
think,
I
especially the new
think
meta, like the new Shaman 4 drop, for example, and various other cards.
makes
I think
Shredder better, but then Technician makes
I
it
don't.
worse.
I mean, I don't think anyone at the moment really thinks that
I think Shredder is obviously
Yeti
the
is
better
better.
card right now. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that Yeti has been played a little bit, but I still think I think Shredder's staying king of the 4-drops personally, with the exception of Dragon decks where Hungry Dragon is gonna take his spot
Um,
for obvious reasons. Because
the
yeah,
other thing
you
to note
need the
is
dragon.
that, of course, the new releases have changed the the relative values of the different shredders, which is
Oh
one of the
yeah, that's
interesting.
true.
Although
Mostly,
actually there are no 2 drops, so Pilot
yeah.
Shredder is still the same.
Power of the Shredder's
Um,
the same. Sky Golem got better.
Skygon got significantly better
Uh,
because of the four. Okay, of the
there's
five four
lots of
drops.
good 4-drops.
Uh, yeah, Hungry Dragon is obviously amazing. The same as Pit Lord, which is the best one at the moment.
Yeah.
Dragon Kick and Sorcerer is better than average.
The
Axe Fling is
3/6,
decent.
even without the activate, is better than
Yeah, the
average.
Shaman, but the Core Rager is obviously sort of fairly bad. So, yeah,
Yeah, Core
and
Raiders not too bad
um,
still.
uh, all of the legendaries also are sort of fairly reasonable to get off of Sneeds.
So
So
yeah,
I
the
think.
Shredders have increased with the exception of Piloted Shredder, which has ironically gone down slightly because
Well, I
of
mean,
Technician.
the drops from Piloted Shredder are still the same.
Oh yeah, the drops are the same. But anyway, so on to a card which I think was criminally underhyped, quite frankly. Like, people just agreed, it was like, oh, it's okay. And I just don't understand that. But anyway, Blackwing Corruptor, 5 mana, 5/4 common. They really want you to build this deck in Arena. It's got the Blackwing synergy thing, just like the Technician. Battle Cry, if you're holding a dragon, deal 3 damage. Yes, that is a fire elemental for 1 less mana.
Yeah, and so it has the same thing that makes Fire Elemental good, which is that. So the weakness of a card the reason that a 5/4 is bad, the reason that a 6/5 is bad relative to a 4/5 or a 5/6, is that it's very vulnerable. It's very difficult to play it into a minion with high attack and low health. Otherwise, that minion's just going to trade into it. So, for example, if you play Lost Tall Strider into their piloted Shredder, you're going to have a bad time. But the reason that Fire Elemental and Blackwing Corruptor are so good is because partly because they develop a big threat whilst clearing the board at the same time, which is a pretty unique effect.
They also just kill the small thing and then
they
trade
get
with
to
the big
kill
thing.
the small thing that's threatening them. So you can't play a 5/4 into a big game hunter, but you can play a Blackwing Corruptor into it. You can just So the big threat of the lower threat that's just run over your Sludge Belcher is that it's going to trade up against something, but Fire Elemental gets to
kill him. That's one of the major bonuses with Sludge Belcher and Shaman. Actually, having played Shaman a lot, is that the Loatheb feel bad thing when you play Sludge Belcher and then they play Loatheb and you're just like, ugh. Is you just Fire Elemental Loatheb and you keep your 1/2. Like
Blackwing Corruptor provides something really unique that a lot of classes don't have, and which especially Druid, for example, doesn't have.
Oh, Druid definitely doesn't have it. Yeah.
You get to play a big minion whilst also doing something else, whilst also dealing with the board, which is a huge deal. And this card is very powerful. But again, the question is, which decks are going to want to run enough dragons for this to be worth it? And Blackwing Corruptor is so good that decks will want to run dragons.
Like, Technician is like a thing where, because it's a small guy, it's, well, relatively small. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here. But because it's relatively like low drop and things like that, and it reduces the percentages, you need more dragons and things like that, it's not enough to hold the deck together on its own. But Corruptor, one, you'll have the enabler more often by quite a large margin actually, because you get 2 extra draws at least, depending on whether you're going first, second, or if you play Arcane Intellect or something, depending on the deck you're playing. So you'll have at least 2 more draws. And on the other side of things, first of all, this also adds another card to the Dragon deck that says, "High Piloted Shredder, I hate you."
Oh yeah, that's the other thing. So clearly they've been sort of thought about the dominance of Piloted Shredder, and they've added
it. It kills the first half with its battle cry on curve. It does,
and then it trades their Millhouse
or their Sludge Belcher.
That's it. This is also incredibly good against Sludge Belcher. So
it wrecks
a lot of the
Belcher.
time, they'll trade into something with a minion, play a Sludge Belcher to protect the damaged minion, and then
or it kills their Loatheb, or
it'll be really sad. Yeah. So
it's so good.
In conclusion, Blackwing Corruptor kills something smaller, and then
kill something
obviously
bigger.
The other thing about Fire Elemental is sometimes it comes down a bit too late to snipe some of the smaller minions that have been played on curve. Whereas Blackwing Corruptor comes on early enough that you're more likely to get to kill their Shredder or their, 2/3.
In a Dragon deck, it's better than Fire Elemental. I think it's worse than Fire Elemental on its own because you need some stuff in your hand. There's still that tiny thing.
The fact that it's conditional obviously is worse.
It's not going to turn up as much as people think it will, though. When you don't have a dragon in your hand, it's probably because you either drew really badly or you just don't have enough dragons in your deck to hold a dragon engine together.
Yeah, again, I think the thing is that, so we had this with mechs, right? Everyone was thinking about, which of the decks that are going to be able to run mechs? And in the end, it wasn't that many. It was pretty much just Mage, because only Mage had enough unique cards that were good enough to make you actually want to run an entire deck full of mechs to make sure that you had one every time you needed it to play loads of mechs.
Yeah, Priest did as well, but the style of the class didn't fit the style of the deck.
Yeah.
So, the point was it was smaller. I think this time, though, because we already have dragons in base set, it means that you can use some of those as well. So that does help. Azure Drake's an amazing card now. Just want to point that out. It's a dragon, and it's already fringe playable.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the problem with that though is that the 5 slot is going to be very crowded in those decks. Um,
Is it? You just
that
play Corruptor and like you're being proactive, so you can play like Corruptor, Azure Drake, Sludge Belcher.
yeah, but that's exactly that's a lot of fives you want to play. And then if you're a paladin, you want to play the paladin five, and that's where the dragons are mostly going to be,
Oh,
I
I
think.
don't think I'd play Azure Drake in the Paladin one though, because
Yeah.
you don't need it. Because you're not burning cards that fast anyway. It's not like you're playing Shaman with a bunch of cheap spells. So I think you don't need it. But in the point is that you already play it in Shaman. And before we move on, actually, I just want to point out how ridiculous it is when a Shaman has 4 fire elementals. Good
Um,
good luck with that.
I don't
Uh,
actually think it's hard to see playing shaman for precisely that reason that you already have 2 fire elementals.
well,
With shaman, you want to have a lot of flexible ways to clear the board, and
Shaman want Blackwing Technician though, because it's good for the early game. They don't really have a good 3 drop, so they were using the Harvest Golem. So you want a 3 drop that's really good, and the rest of the
the
dragons are fine, and
problem
then
with
you
that
get
though
Corruptor.
is that you don't need hungry dragon. Um, hungry dragon is actually quite bad in shaman because that you
It
give them
kills
something
your
to eat your
totems.
totems with. And you also have your own amazing four, which is Hungry Dragon with absolutely no drawback.
That's true.
Um,
That's true.
and so yeah, so for those reasons, and also reasons of space is really really
You
difficult
already
to
play Drake though. You could
for,
cut like you cut damage combo. You already play Drake, and I will actually
start running
say,
some late game dragons instead of whatever.
well, you've got some new late game dragons that you could get away with in Shaman more so than other classes.
I mean, it's definitely a
So
possible
I
route. I mean,
think
I can see the shape of the deck that you're outlining. I'm just very
I'm going
skeptical
to
that it's going
try
to be quite.
it. I'll say that I'm going to try it, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and obviously that's all you
And
can say about a
yeah,
lot of stuff. It's hard to tell exactly how good it's going to be.
obviously, yeah. But anyway, a card that I don't need to tell exactly how good it's going to be because it just isn't. We're actually getting into that streak of cards, which is not very good. Volcanic Drake, 6 mana, 6/4 common,
Ah,
another common. Dragon, again, there's tons of these common dragons. Costs 1 less for each minion that died this turn. Now, I think I'll talk about the mechanic more than the card here. So, the mechanic, this is the secondary mechanic of the set. I think most people can agree that dragon, like the unique type of dragon synergies, is the main showcased mechanic. But there's a couple of sort of there's a couple of under mechanics where there's like if it takes damage and survives, things like that, just random, or just if it takes damage, random things like that. But then there's this mechanic, costs 1 less for each minion that died this turn. Now, I was suspicious that this mechanic was bad. I just made the comment when we went over spoiler that it might see play based on the fact that you might need it for dragon synergies because we only saw Corruptor and Technician and not any of the big dragons or the class cards. So I thought maybe it'll see play. Having seen it on the stream, the fact that it never activates, and also having seen the rest of the cards of this mechanic that never activate, and it's just bad. Every single card with this mechanic I'm labeling as terrible.
um, I disagree actually. And I think this is it's a difficult one to evaluate, right? Because you look at the Shaman card, you look at Hungry Dragon, even Blackwing Technician, and you see, okay, so we know roughly how good a 3/5 is. We know roughly how good a big body is, but a conditional effect like this, where it very much depends on how you build your deck, um, it's hard to evaluate. And Volcanic Drake does something really unique, and I think that's going to be decks can use that. So what I don't think is going to be the case is I don't think that Volcanic Drake is going to be used in decks where your primary way of getting minions to die that turn to make it cheaper is by having stuff on the board and then trading it into their
It just doesn't work.
stuff. And like you have 2 minions trading into their 2 minions, and then you get to play Volcanic Drake for 2. Because it's a bit too situational in a kind of deck that can't really stand that much situationalness. So, for example, you can look at it in Paladin and say, oh, I've got this Consecration, I've got Muster for Battle. I can have a Muster and then trade them into their guy and kill their guy and then play Drake for 2. Um, Partly because that's not the deck in which you get them that much value from playing a Drake for 2. And also, it's important to make the distinction between a 6/4 for 2 on turn 2, which would be amazing, right?
And
Uh,
6/4 for 2
and
on
a
turn
6
6.
4 for 2 on turn for example, which is obviously much less relevant, much more likely to die to death by a true silver.
Or a
And
swipe, that's painful. 4 HP is
yeah,
not a good stat.
but where I think this card really, and also, so you can think about it in terms of the same thing as Kel'Thuzad, right? Um, there's the dream scenario with Kel'Thuzad where you trade your 5/5 into their 5/5 and you play the Kel'Thuzad and you get it revived. But so much of the game of Hearthstone is about playing minions that aren't going to get traded for like that. Playing minions
Even
that are going to
more now.
swing over their minion and live, or that are going to you're not going to be able to get that really clean
Yeah.
trade. And we saw this in the stream that they were playing sort of fairly generic mid-rangey decks,
And it
and
just
the
didn't
Drake was just
work.
sitting. And in those mid-rangey decks, it's really important to hit your drops. You can't afford to have a 6-mana 6/4 sitting around in your hand for a few turns waiting to
Yeah. The
wait.
other thing is you can't play it in a dragon deck because the dragon decks are like if you get stuck in the mirror match. This is how awkward Volcanic Drake is in the mirror match, by the way. You've got Blackwing Technicians, which just hit each other repeatedly before actually dying. Then you've got Corruptor, which takes up your whole turn while removing something to win the Technician war. You've got Hungry Dragons, which don't trade with each other. You've got the 3/5, if you're playing those, which don't trade with each other. And at that point, you're at like turn 6 or 7, and you're thinking, and I haven't played my 6-drop yet. What am I doing?
Right.
Because 6-drops are amazing. Why do I have this weird 6-drop in my hand?
And there's the march of all these cards which are really strong, like really strong big guys, as opposed to the current situation where there's all this random Silverhand recruits and imps and
There's
haunted
random
creepers
stuff just on the board dying at random
sticky
times.
shredders, and this is going to be if the metagame becomes much more about huge guys, which seems likely because there are so many strong ones in the set. That also makes Volcanic Drake a bit weaker. However,
Yeah.
having said all of that, there there is a deck in which Volcanic Drake might be good, and that deck is in a more control-y deck where you have lots of powerful board clears, and your idea is that it's okay because you're going to do nothing, and you can do nothing, and you can wait and wait, and have a big hand, and then you can have the one big swing turn where you destroy all of their cards.
And then your opponent says, "Thanks for turning on my removal. I've been holding on to this for a very long time."
Right, but the problem I have a lot of time in, for example, Handlock, or is
Handlock has
that
space issues, though.
that's true. And I'll get there in a minute. But in Handlock, you have this big problem where you AOE down their board full of stuff, and you get loads of value on turn 4 or 5 or 6, and then once having done that, you're down to quite low health because this stuff has been hitting you or you've just been tapping, and then you're now quite low, and then they just get to play more stuff, and then you're threatened by that, and you can't really play all these good efficient threats you have in your hand because you have to defend yourself against the new stuff.
Yeah.
And Volcanic Drake allows you to have those big swing turns where you not only clear the board, but you get to develop a 6/4, which if they do use one of those efficient rules like swipe or true silver or deathbite on it, what they're not doing is playing more threats, which gives you that opportunity to then develop some stuff, which is a big deal. So I think it's possible that in decks like that, maybe some sort of really defensive priest with light bombs or decks that have the ability to just really powerfully swing the board. And Warlock has got actually better at doing that in this set, and we'll talk about that later. But it's possible that you will want to play this card just to let you get back on the board after doing that.
I don't know. Like
That said,
4
it
HP
there is
so
the risk
low.
there is the risk that it's going to get stuck in your hand. And the other thing is that suppose you're playing one of the decks that's now common because Volcanic Drake is incredibly good, and that that has all these board clears on the Volcanic Drake. Your opponent knows that if you play a Hellfire, you're going to be able to cast Volcanic Drake, and so they can kind of play around it. So you're one man off doing a Hellfire plus Drake
Constantly, and then the problem is like it just gets to like turn 10, then you play your Volcanic Drake, and they're like swipe Sylvanas, and you feel like a dumbass.
Well,
It's just
if we've learned anything, it's that cost reduction mechanics are extremely powerful
when they're consistent.
because you can play so heavily into them.
But they have to
And
be
cards,
reliable.
yeah, cards that you can build your deck around are the most difficult to judge in this
Yeah.
kind of context. And I think that Volcanic Drake is going to see some play um, in some sort of very specific strategy in which it's good.
Ma-
Um,
Yeah. I don't know. I think it might see a tiny, tiny, tiny amount, but I'm not sold. But that's
so this
just
is one in which we have a disagreement, and it's quite hard to set up um,
parameters
a
for it. It's like
uh, it's quite hard to set up
a like guideline
a
to how we're going to
an
decide this.
advanced bet on exactly how much play Volcanic Drake is going to see. But when we come back in the coming months
I
and
guess
reevaluate what
we'll
that's
like
going
agree or disagree because
yeah,
I don't think it'll see any. You think it'll see some.
I
Although
see a deck in which Volcanic
if
Drake is.
this pulls a shade of Naxxramas on us, where it's like me and Birdie who did the set review back then were like, Shade's not going to see any play. We were right for 6 months,
And then suddenly people realize,
and then
oh
suddenly
wait,
it's like Shade
you need a
everywhere.
combo druid. It's a 3-drop, but it's
The
stealth.
best thing was when people came up to me and was
Yeah,
like, "You were wrong about Shade," and I'm like, and everyone agreed with me.
yeah. Everyone was wrong about Shade. It's really interesting,
Like
and there's this
everyone was wrong about Shade.
popular narrative. Everyone was wrong about Sludge Belcher. Everyone was wrong about Trogzor. Everyone was wrong about Doctor Boom. But Shade, no one really talks about how incredibly wrong everyone was about Shade.
Yeah,
Um,
because everyone was wrong about it for so long that we forgot about it for 6 months. That was the funny thing about Shade. If Volcanic Drake does that, I'm going to be annoyed. It just like shows up randomly when the next set comes out. And it's like, hey guys, I'm good. It just randomly
yeah.
shows up. That'd be really irritating. But
So
anyway,
there's lots of things going against the Drake, but there's enough going for it that I think there's some interesting things to do.
so we do have one more common dragon in the neutrals, which is again relevant for Arena. 6 mana, 6/6. Draconid? Is it Draconid? Someone corrected me on this
I
last time.
assume it's Draken.
It's Draconid, right? Because last video I put out had like 3 people responding on grammar rules. Because
What would it
I
otherwise
said
be?
Draconoid because I misread it.
Oh no, it's definitely Draconid.
Yeah, so it's Draconid. Anyway, so it's Draconid
Draconid?
Crusher, Dra- Draken,
Let's just let's
Draconid.
let's just
All right, so
Draconid.
so yeah, as you can tell by the fact we're spending this long on the name, this card isn't very interesting. So it's 6 mana,
Oh yeah.
6/6, with a drawback. Battle Cry. If your opponent has 15 or less health, gain +3/+3. Now, the most interesting thing about this card is the fact that becoming a 9/9 is a drawback in Constructed. In Arena, it makes it better, but
Well, I
in
mean,
Constructed, your opponent's like, oh sweet, big game hunter.
so one of the
Ah.
things I've kind of learned since GV, since Naxxramas and GVG, is that at a certain point in the game, around turn 5 and turn 6, just playing something huge is often not good enough.
In fact, it will sometimes lose you the game.
Yeah, because one huge guy that's not very sticky can just get removed, it can just get ignored. Um,
So
and
awkward.
so, even so, we've looked at Fell Reaver, right? Which is, the idea is you use an incredibly aggressive deck where the drawback's not going to be that relevant, and then you get to play an 8/8 on turn 5. And part of the reason that Fell Reaver is bad, not just because of Big Game Hunter, but because of all the drawbacks next
Together,
to
just make it
getting,
bad.
yeah, all the drawbacks together next to the fact that getting a 8/8 on turn 5, I mean, obviously it's good, but it's actually not that good.
You know, at this point, I'm
And
literally
similarly,
saying they could make a 7/7 for 5 and no one would play it.
um, that's actually a really interesting conjecture. I think it might be true.
Doesn't
I
that just
mean,
show how ridiculously powerful Big Game Hunter is?
yeah.
It's like,
Um,
it's definitely the most lasting base set card. Like, it's actually getting stronger with time, in my opinion.
whereas, everyone's now consigned Fireball and Ancient of Law to the scrap heap.
No, but they're not like Fireball is still very good, but it's getting slowly weaker over time as we get more options. Same with like Frostball is still the best 2-drop removal spell, but the point is that Flame Cannon doesn't make it worse, but it means you have more options. Whereas when
The
it comes
the
to
gap
Big Game
between
Hunter, it's actually increasing, not decreasing.
right, because Big Game Hunter does something unique.
It does
That
something
scrap
unique
heaps.
that's super powerful. Whereas before,
Yeah.
it was traditionally it was always Ragnaros that was the target, and then Naxxramas didn't really add any Big Game Hunter targets, so we didn't notice. But then with the advent of Handlock coming back at the beginning of GBG, and then we had Boom come around, and everyone realized like the main problem with Boom at the moment is part that he's the best 7-drop, but the other problem with Boom is because he's caused Big Game Hunter to be in every single deck. He's actually single-handedly squashed every other card with 7 attack in the entire game. Like,
Completely important metagame, and people did kind of note this at the beginning of GVG, but so if we go back to our set review of GVG, I don't think either of us said until
no, we didn't.
Oh, this is going to make Handlock dramatically worse because everyone's going to be playing Big Game.
No, we were focused on Trogzor at the time, as everyone
that's
else
the sort
was.
of predictions that I want to be trying to make.
I will say Crusher, however, will not see play because it
Okay,
literally
yeah. So
can't.
back to Crusher.
It can't see play.
6, obviously bad. 9 for 6. Would you even play that?
No.
And it's conditional. If your opponent has 15 or less health, then you probably want to be just throwing burn at them anyway.
I will almost never double activate my Blood Knights. If I'm playing Blood Knight, I will never double activate it unless I'm going all in because I can only win that way.
If for whatever reason you want to play a deck with a huge guy that, in an aggro deck, you probably play Fel Reaver. Dracula Crusher, it's not bad in Arena, but
oh, in Arena it's much better because if you play an aggressive deck, then you basically have a Venture Mercenary on turn 6. It's bigger.
Yeah. So and the base case is not that bad in Arena either.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
It's also a common dragon, and considering Corruptor and Technician are commons.
Oh yeah. So let's take a moment to talk about dragons in Arena.
There are 4 common dragons in neutral, and both of the Blackwing cards are commons.
That's true. On the other hand, if you think about how many mechs there are in Arena, there are a lot of common mechs in Arena.
There are.
And even so, cards like Tinkertown Technician aren't that great.
On board versus in hand is different, though.
That's true.
That's relevant. There's also Fairy Dragon, which you can hold on to. Azure Drake, which is a very high pick. So
yeah, but it isn't. So that is a good point. But I don't think you'll be able to reliably pick things like Technician and Corruptor.
I think Technician, you won't even feel that bad if you do pick him, because 2/4s are usually okay. They're not good, you won't pick them over other things, but the point is that you won't feel horrible having a random Technician in your deck.
That used to be the case, but I think in Modern Arena, where you have things like Spider Tank and Ogre Brute running around.
Okay, Ogre Brute, yeah, that's true. But I have been playing a decent amount of Arena, and I don't like picking 2/4s, but it's not the end of the world. Like, I'll pick one if the other 2 commons are bad. And same with Corruptor. Like, if I have 1 or 2 dragons in my deck, because the common dragons look like they're good Arena picks, if I have 1 or 2 dragons in my deck, I'll take a Corruptor.
Yeah.
It's not terrible, and it depends on the other picks. Like, I'm not going to take it over like a Piloted Shredder or Mechanical Yeti or something, but like, I'll take a Corruptor over some other commons because they're not fantastic. But I don't think you can build a dragon deck, but I think Dragon Synergy may come up once or twice in an Arena run.
Yeah, I mean, it's not terrible. Okay, so moving on.
Alright, now on to the worst card in this. Alright, maybe worst. I think it's like bottom 2. Dragon Egg. Sorry, can't even say this with a straight face. 1 mana, 0/2, rare. When this minion takes damage, summon a 2/1 Whelp. Why is it called a Whelp? Whelps are 1/1s.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a bit awkward when they do that.
This card is also bad.
Are there any other examples of that happening where there's 2 tokens with the same name that have different stats?
Nope. The imps are all 1/1s. Even the new imp from the Warlock card is a 1/1.
I guess like some of the treants have taunt and some of them have charge and die at the end of the turn and stuff. But
yeah, but those are all 2/2s. They have different effects, but they're all 2/2s. They're not different stat totals because they're all the same thing.
By the way, Jotto, is it okay? Is it going to mess up the video editing if I take a quick break?
Yeah, I'll just wail on Dragon Egg for the next 2 minutes. So
no, it's okay. So it's okay. If it's going to be a problem, I'll stay. Okay. Dragon Egg. Okay. Whenever this.
It's like, no, I want to wail on Dragon Egg.
No, I mean, it's just going to disrupt the program.
Alright, just.
This glass of water was full at the beginning of the show.
Dragon Egg, go for it.
Anyway, Dragon Egg. So, the dream with the Dragon Egg is you play the Dragon Egg, and then on turn 2, you get to call Taskmaster.
Yes, that's the only good synergy.
Run it into something else, get another Whelp, and then it's basically like a Nerubian Egg that's...
Oh my god, it's a Nerubian
not nearly
egg.
as good.
Yeah.
And I don't think an Arubian egg that's not nearly as good is going to see that much play.
Worst case scenario is it does literally nothing.
Yeah. There's this horrible anti-synergy with, you want to be playing loads of like whirlwind type effects to trigger it multiple times because if you were
Yeah.
going to trigger it multiple times, you might as well just play like a random 2/1 for
Someone
one.
said Wild
Um,
Pyromancer, and then there was a reply immediately saying, "Nope, you didn't think that through very well."
yeah. Oh my God, if you play Dragon Egg, right, then you can play Pyromancer Whirlwind. And,
And then just kill everything.
yeah. No, I think you end up with a 2/1 at the end of that.
Yeah,
Your
two
investment
one,
of
it's
three
fine.
cards for 4 mana. Um, yeah, so Dragon Egg is
Terrible.
yeah.
Alright. Grim Patron, my favorite card in the entire set, not because it's super overpowered or anything, because it's hilarious. 5 mana 3/3. Whenever it's a rare, whenever this minion survives damage, summon another Grim Patron. Now, what solidified this as my favorite card, and I'm hoping this ends up on Trollden's video because it should, was the release stream had a pyroblasting Grim Patron board, which was hilarious. So it involved Warsong Commander, Grim Patron, and and unstable ghouls or other whirlwind effects. And at one
Yeah, they
point,
had.
he literally
There
just
was Neo
whirlwinded,
Rage.
made it 3 more, and then could have killed him, and was just like, nah, let's trade one, play another, play the Axe Flinger minion that got spoiled a while, and just inner rage just for the fun of it. But he could have just pyroblasted him with 3/3s. It was hilarious. I don't think that will
Yeah.
ever normally happen in a game. It was just it just kind of happened because the developers that were streaming they didn't have any way of removing the patron.
Well, no, I mean, I think so. We've seen Combo Warrior played at a fairly high level before. I mean,
But you need a
uh,
turn setup for it, really, because
Spanish
5
took it
mana
pretty
is a
far
lot.
in the World Championships. We have Emperor Thaurissan, which makes combo decks a lot better.
All right, that's true. We'll get to him, but
And so
that's
it's
yeah.
very possible that, so it's actually incredibly difficult to evaluate how good the Warsong Commander Grim Patron deck is going
Almost
to be.
impossible, actually. I would say it's
Um,
impossible to
but
evaluate.
there is a non-zero chance, from my perspective, that if we said, "Oh, Grim Patron's terrible," and obviously play,
I
we
don't think
could be,
it's terrible. I'm going to be hopping on
we
that
could have egg on our
bandwagon.
faces when it gets nerfed after 2 weeks.
No, no, that's what
Um,
happens when you use Hellfire with a Dragon Egg on the board. But
okay, so Grim Patron. The thing about Grim Patron is the base case of Grim Patron isn't that bad either. So suppose you have a Death Bite and you hit something with it, and then on the next turn you play a Grim Patron and you hit something with Death Bite.
and then you get 2/3/3s
You,
that if
you get a
yeah.
3/2 and a 3/3, which isn't bad in itself. And then if your opponent leaves them there, they might just die. Um, it's actually quite. It's a card that you can do quite a lot with. The
It's
problem
also
with it
hard to
is
remove multiple copies of
when
this
you
guy.
pull off the amazing combo of so you have a Grim Patron. They need to deal 3 damage to it and kill it in one shot. Otherwise, it's pointless, right?
He could have
Um,
consecrated it, and then he realized, hang on a sec, there's a 3/2 and a 3/3. If I consecrate, then he has a 3/3 and a 3/1.
Yeah, Grim Patron is actually an extremely awkward card. I think it's it's a card that you need to devote a lot of resources to make it work. Which is why I
Yeah,
think the Combo Warrior with the huge amount of card draw and
could do it.
stuff is the way that to go. I don't think you can't just throw it into any deck that isn't completely focused on this. And the question is a deck that's completely focused on this going to be good
You know
enough?
what? If someone makes
Um,
a deck like that, one, they should call it Beer Party, and two, they should send it my way because I will immediately do a deck tech on it, and then also record a bunch of videos of me playing it because I think it's hilarious.
yeah, you can do some crazy awesome
Like,
things with it. The question is whether it's going to be good enough.
oh yeah,
And that,
that's the
that
real
seems like a
question.
kind of very vacuous pundity thing to say, like, oh, it's good, but will it
No,
be good
this is like
enough?
Hobgoblin. So much potential, but is it good enough?
Yeah, and I mean, the answer with Hobgoblin is
No.
not right.
But the point is, it's the Hobgoblin of the set.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Um,
we'll have to see at a later date how he does. But I'm rooting for the drunk dwarf.
I predict that at least one Combo Warrior will show up and do fairly well at a somewhat major tournament.
Yep.
Um,
All right. On
okay, so
to
now,
this is the legendaries. Now, funnily enough, there are 2 cards in here which have a parallel in terms of stats and also in terms of probably playability to Kel'Thuzad and Lotheb, which I find really amusing. They're even in the same place on the spoiler, like in the order they were revealed. It's really funny. So, Emperor Thorazan. Now, 6 mana, 5/5 legendary. Again, legend is the only really relevant one as far as constructed goes because you can only play one. At the end,
Also,
uh,
legendary is also more relevant now because of Rend.
oh yeah, Rent, he kills them. But anyway, at the end of your turn, reduce the cost of cards in your hand by 1. Now, that doesn't sound like much until you play it in a game and you realize just how ridiculously broken that effect is. It was played in one game that we saw, at least. It was played on both sides, I think. But we saw it in one game where it was a shaman. And the ridiculous combo play that he could have done next turn, and he just conceded, which was a bit annoying. But he could have gone like a Zero Drake, and if he drew either Hex, Lightning Bolt, or like Crackle, he could have killed a 7/11 and a 5/4 on turn 8.
Yeah. So Thorostan is obviously it has an incredibly powerful effect. The simple thing is you play it. You get a big discount of mana and all the stuff in your hand, and then your opponent immediately has to kill it or you win the game.
If it activates twice, you might as well concede.
Yeah. But the other thing about this card is that it does very much depend on the deck that you're using it in.
Yeah.
So the problem with this card, right, is it's sort of quite a slow card. You want to play it in a mid-rangey, late-gamey deck, where on turn 6 when you play it, you're still going to have some stuff in hand to make cheaper.
Yeah, this is not an aggro card, it's a mid-range card.
Also, you want to have enough... but also you want to be able to use those cards of which the cost has been reduced as quickly as possible, because obviously if you follow Thorostan up with playing one big card in the next turn, it's not going to be as much of a big tempo swing as if you play
playing a
four
bunch
cards,
of spells, for example.
The cost of which has all been reduced by 1.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that if you play a deck with enough card draw and sustain to have a big enough hand to play Thorostan, and to keep going and take advantage of that extra mana without running out of cards, you're going to need to play a lot of card draw, and if you do that, then you're going to end up with clunky hands when you don't Thorostan.
There is an exception to that, by the way, which is
the
3 decks that I think Thorozan is strongest in. Like, I'll do my... you probably can. I'll do my my spiel on him, but the reason I said that this guy's a parallel to Lothar, besides the same stat total and fairly similar cost, although I'm glad this is not 5 mana, jeez. But anyway, so the reason it's parallel is because Thorozan works in any deck. However, to make him shine, you need to be in certain decks, whereas Lothar is a bit more sort of universal, but not like super powerful in one deck. Now, the 3 decks that make him shine the most, from what I can tell, are... and he shines in a lot of decks, but the main point is there are 3 decks that shine the most. Oil Rogue, because getting rogue spells down to 1 or 0 mana, like you can go Deadly Poison Blade Flurry for 1 mana, that's insane, and Sprint costs less, you can go Prep Spin for 3, so you can sustain and then just kill him faster, as opposed to running out of steam, because you just kill him faster. The other ones are Shaman, because just having cheaper spells actually matters a lot more. Not to mention, you don't have to rattle off your spells, they're all 2-for-1s. So what's going to happen is it will just mean that your game plan for your late game cards is a turn faster than his, so that he has to be reactive to you, and then if he ever gains board advantage, you have like 2 mana hexes that you just can't beat. The other one is Freeze Mage, which James Huggs, one of the Acebreakers players that's been on Versus Series I think twice at this point, he plays Freeze Mage, and he was actually saying that Thorozan is possibly the most broken in that deck, because you can go Alexstrasza Ice Block on turn 10. Good luck beating that without Kazan Mystic. You just can't.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And you can do things with Antonidas with it, and things with... I would put... So in a more general way, I would put it in that Thorostan is best in the decks which have a lot of control over how much they draw, and that are going to be that are never going to be in a situation where they just don't have any cards in their hand. So that's why it's good in Rogue, right? Because you have the sprint, so Rogue pretty much never loses from running out of cards. The way they lose is from running out of cards in their deck, or by
not drawing sprint, which does happen sometimes.
Not being able to deal with stuff. So so maybe a good rule of thumb is if you've ever seen the deck lose because it decked out, then this is a good deck to play Thorostan in, because those are the decks where they have the ability to control how much they draw, how long the game is, and so that's the ability to have the tempo when you don't draw Thorossan, but also have enough sustain to play Thorossan when you do have it. It's particularly good in Rogue because obviously the downside of Thorossan is if you play it on curve, you don't get to do anything the same turn. So that makes it a lot better in weapon classes, especially Rogue, because you've got backstab and prep.
You have backstab, prep. Yeah, you can remove
It's worth
stuff.
noting that it's a bit kind of awkward in Rogue because you do have the 0 mana spells that don't get any benefit. But
also, conceal is back. Maybe that's a really dumb combo, by the way.
Yeah, I don't think this is worth it. Just because...
I don't think it is, but the point is, like, you could, in theory, someone might try it. I think it's gimmicky. It's really gimmicky, but it's gonna be funny if it ever happens.
Yeah, I mean, the powerful thing about this deck is about this card is that it just gives you so many more options, right? If you've got a big handful of stuff, suddenly you can play more of that stuff. And one of the big problems with a 6-drop and the reason that the best 6-drops are things like Sylvanas and Shield Maiden instead of things like Cairn is because the real issue with a 6-drop and above
it's a tempo loss. We've seen this
is
with
that
high main.
it's a big tempo loss. You have to worry about it just getting ignored.
Yeah.
And that's why things like Spectral Knight, which people predicted were going to be amazing, were actually just not that great because by turn 5, turn 6, what happens is it just gets ignored. They can go face. You play the card, they ignore it. They play a Wolf Rider and a Mad Scientist and just hit your face. And suddenly, they already had a bit of a board, and now they have a bigger board, and you can't really deal with it.
Thorazan's a bit different there because it's a tempo loss, but then he has like a rubber band effect to him. Where even if they ignore him, you now have a bunch of removal spells that are cheaper.
It's a bit like Kel'Thuzad, actually, in that way.
Just
in the sense
2 mana less.
So, against a Face Hunter, for example, and if you're playing Kel'Thuzad in Druid, you play it and they want to ignore it because it's usually what they do is ignore your 8-drop and just go for the face, but then if you have a taunt up, and that taunt's going to keep going back, so they can't really ignore it.
Yeah. And
the same thing with Thorossan, it's going to keep generating more and more tempo over time until maybe they're just screwed. That said, I mean, Face Hunter is obviously a deck in which you least want to be playing this card in a deck.
But then you've also got like something interesting is, I mean,
so that's something to say that Thorossan is a pressure pushing the metagame more towards
late game stuff. Face Hunter is going to be that deck which Hearthstone has been lacking something in GVG's metagame, where traditionally in card games you've got, the theory is you're either slightly slower or way faster to beat a deck, because if you're way faster then they just can't keep up with you, but if you're slightly slower your value cards are better. Now I think Face Hunter, because of the inclusion of Thorazan, also the way dragon decks work, it seems to be that the slightly slower the dragon deck, the more it's going to win over the mirror at least. But then if they're too slow, they're just going to get got by Face Hunter, which got a new card that they can use. Thorazan really accentuates that, where it's making those slightly slower decks a little bit faster, so they just roll over the slightly faster deck, but they're still going to get undercut quite massively. Whereas in GVG we had this really weird situation where mid-range decks just beat everything. We have this.
Yeah, I would classify it a little bit differently because I think the speed is affected by like whether your deck is proactive or reactive. So
reactive decks just couldn't beat the proactive
like
decks.
Play minions on curve and just smash their face in like Druid. Then you're going to be really good against decks that are a bit slower than you.
It's a bit different.
And really bad against decks that are proactive and a bit faster than you.
The reactive deck is usually on the back. It's obviously on the back foot.
If you're a reactive deck like Rogue, where you've got lots of removal and not as many minions, then that's very good against strategies where they have to play minions into your minions, and you can just remove their minions, keep hitting face. So a reactive deck against a deck that's proactive and a bit slower is going to be really good. But against a deck that's reactive and a bit slower, like Control Warrior against Rogue, where all your minions just get killed by their removal and you can't do anything with your removal because they're not playing anything, and then you just keep,
because you're just dealing against the hero power.
Whereas Rogue against a reactive, faster deck like Zoo or Tempo Mage or something, where what you're going to be able to do is they're going to be trying to play their small minions and stick their small minions while removing your bigger minions. But then you have stab and SI in the removal.
Yeah, you have the same stuff. That's like a tempo mirror, but basically like
it's against a more proactive
Before people get
really fast.
confused about
Basically,
the 15 or so proactive and reactives in the last two
yeah.
sentences,
There's various typologies, and
uh,
we're kind of veering off into some weird theoretical
basically,
territory where you're trying to define a concept that doesn't actually really matter to the
alright,
game. And
so
so,
TLDR, if you have a deck with a bunch of removal, you want to try and put your game plan forward without losing tempo, so you can keep removing your stuff. That's how Orogue works. And then you've got the decks which are a bit slower. Now the reason why this comes into Thorazan is because what he lets you do is he lets you play this 5/5. So they have to deal with it because unless they're just going to kill you, they have to deal with it because the effect keeps happening.
so
But
there's a
it lets you,
non-trivial number of games in which you will just play this,
yeah.
and for whatever reason, they won't have enough removal to kill a 5/5 in their hand, and they will just
Yeah.
die.
Something interesting
Uh,
is that if you play two cards, you play a removal spell to stop his game plan from last turn, and then you play a threat, you just used an innervate.
right, yeah.
And that stacks for multiple turns. And in the case of a deck like Shaman, for example, where you can go like you can go Azure Drake for 4 mana and then just blow up his board, and you're like, oh, I spent 3 cards, drew a card, still have 1 mana left over. I've got like 2 overload, but that's fine. And the other thing is that, especially especially in Freeze Mage and Shaman, because I mean Rogue can obviously use it massively, but they're a bit faster, so they might want to get on the board a bit faster than Thorazan can. But they're still going to play it. But the point is, they still have stuff to play under it. In the case of
Right.
Shaman and Freeze Mage, because you're being quite slow for the first couple of turns, with the exception of the new Shaman card, which is going to beat your face in if you don't deal with it, very quickly actually. But the point is that they're a bit slower in the early turns, and they're a bit more on the sort of totem up, be reactive, and it's like that's why they're so good against handlock, because they get a couple extra turns set up, and it's like giant, or just like flame totem, trade my first couple turns into it, and it works. But then Thorazan, you play him, and then you're like, hang on a sec, my Neptulon now costs 6 for later in the game. I've got like a 6 mana boom, which I can play with a Lightning Storm and a Hex if I need to. And it's just the fact that they store up
Yeah.
cards, so Thorazan becomes more powerful the longer the game goes on. Like, imagine if you go Neptulon, and then you top deck Thorazan before you play your Murlocs.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another point to think about is obviously if the the cheaper a card is, the bigger, like in kind of relative terms, the effect of the Thorazan is.
Yeah.
So 1 mana card, the difference between 1 mana and 0 mana is huge.
It's
Difference
infinite,
between 5 mana.
basically.
Yeah, it's infinite. The number of 0 mana cards you can play in a turn is infinite. The number of 1 mana cards you can play a turn is
Finite.
the
10.
number of mana.
It's basically 10, yeah. Turn 10.
If you have if you have 8 mana, if you reduce the cost of 2 5 mana cards to 4, then you can play those 2 cards and get the same bonus in 1 turn.
As opposed
whereas,
to just 1 per turn, is the main point.
whereas
Like,
you,
it
you
just
could
gives you
play
so much.
8 2 mana cards that now cost 1, or 1 9 mana card that now costs 8.
You can play an 8-drop on turn 7,
So,
that's relevant.
The other thing you have to think about with Thorazan is how big is your hand going to be at the stage of the game in which you play it. And that's why I want to kind of push back on your Shaman thing, because I don't think it's going to be that great in Shaman for the reasons that sometimes in Shaman you just run out of cards in the late game. You don't have that much, kind of playing off the top. And that's fine. That's why you pack your deck with stuff like Boom and Neptulon and stuff.
Yeah, but you've
And
got
Shaman does-
Neptulon, you've got Chromagus, which I think they can use better than any other class, personally, because they have those cheap removal spells to not lose tempo. So they can I'll talk about the Shaman thing when I get to Chromagus, because I've been talking to a lot of other Shaman players, and Shaman's one of the classes I know the most about. So when we get to Chromagus, I'll talk
quite
about that.
strongly disagree with that, actually. And I'll tell you why later. But,
Yeah, we'll get there.
So Thorazan is going to be great in those decks where you know that you're going to get to turn 6 and you're going to have a lot of cards in your hand, and you're playing a deck with a lot of card draw. So that's Rogue, that's combo decks like Freeze Mage and
yeah.
Combo Warrior, but it's also Warlock.
You know a really stupid
The
one?
thing about Warlock is you're never going to run out of cards. That's why the Handlock Mirror is one of the most fun matchups in the game, because both players neither player is ever going to lose because they run out of steam.
It's just whoever it's like
So it's
whoever
all about who
plays
uses their
better,
stuff
basically.
most efficiently, and who has the most tempo and who has the huge swing turns. And so I think in Handlock, Thorazan is obviously going to be a huge deal.
There is the stupidest synergy in the game, though. Turn 7 combo in Druid.
Oh god, yeah. I mean, okay. So there's all these caveats. We're talking about the decks in which Thorazan is going to be like the best in, but it's good enough that even in the decks that don't use it to its biggest full potential, it's still going to be good.
Like, Druid doesn't even use it to full potential, but then if you innovate it out in turn 4, then you've got like oh, 6 mana Ancient Allure, that's good. And now I've got my, like,
Yeah.
I can
And again,
just
so we were
play
talking
my six
about
drops.
your flexibility in how much, in how much, in how many cards you draw and how much mana you can spend. And Druid has a great example of that because there's, Ancient of Law, and you can choose whether or not to draw with your wraths, things like that.
Wild
So
growths that get stuck in your
uh,
hand later on, they only cost 1 mana to cycle now.
that's a good point. So yeah, so with Druid, you have that choice about how fast you're gonna play the game, and so that's why Thoristan is also quite good in Druid.
So I think
Um,
before we burn a hole in the universe from talking about this more than the rest of the set review, because I think this is the longest we've
Another
took. Do you
point
want
to
to
make
wrap
about
it up a bit?
another point to make about Thoristan in general, and is because you don't know what's in your opponent's hand, it makes it so much harder to play around stuff. So, playing around 9 mana combo is one thing, but playing around 7 mana combo or potentially double combo, is so much more difficult. And because the chances that they had the combo in their hand when they played Thoristan is quite low, maybe, but you have to play around suddenly everything they could possibly do, and because all of their cards are cheaper, the set of possible combos is so much higher that it makes it
I
much
mean,
more difficult to play.
when was the last time you had to play around Holy Nova Organized Circle on turn 7?
Exactly.
It's like, that's a thing
Uh,
now. Or Light
so yeah,
Bomb on turn 5.
when this card
Like,
was
I mean,
initially
on turn 5,
spoiled, I
5
was I
mana.
was looking at it and thinking people are going to overhype this, but I don't think you can really
I don't think
overhype it.
you
You can
can
stress how
overhype
unbelievably
this.
this is going to be.
Not to mention, we're not
Uh,
saying it's good in aggro decks because it's not. Like Lothar,
yeah.
kind of, it got into the aggro decks because it was 5 mana
Yeah.
and it was a tempo play,
Okay.
but
So your
this is
five
different.
six drop in your aggro deck is going to be the thing that tops your curve and makes them
Yeah, this
die.
is
That locks
not
down the
the
board.
top of the curve. This is the
Yeah.
start of your curve.
The thing. So if you think about a mech mage, you play Doctor Boom and Antonidas because you top deck them on turn 7 and then you just win,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, you don't want to be top decking this on turn 7 with no cards in hand.
It's okay, guys, you
Uh,
got 0 mana spare parts.
yeah, you could play a spare part too. Um, so yeah, and
But
I actually think that Warlock is so Warlock's been kind of screwed by GVG for a whole variety of reasons.
they
Partly
got
the
some good
take the
cards, though, that
Soulfire,
might bring them back in.
partly because so as cards get better, the hero power gets worse. Well, the hero power was supposed to get better. That's what Reina claimed, right? That
I
you
think
can
everyone
cards
did.
get better, so you can use the Warlock hero power to draw the new card. But also because the cards are better, the opportunity cost of spending 2 mana on your hero power is higher,
Is higher. The other thing
and
is
everything's
that
stickier. You can't guarantee clearing the board, so
the other thing was
you
there was more swing turns and less gap turns. So your hero power became like, especially for Warlock,
right.
which doesn't have that many good class cards. It was more about playing neutral cards. It played a bit more like you were just trying to fit the best neutral cards, and then whenever you had a gap in your mana curve, you had hero power. It's not like Paladin where you do have gaps in your mana curve because you're a different style of
Yeah,
deck.
right.
So
That's the thing about
yeah,
Warlock hero power. The Warlock hero power is always like it's not situational. It's at a certain level of how good it is, all the time, pretty
it's
much.
always good. The problem
Yeah,
is
it's
that
always
you
good,
need
never
to
great.
play these super good cards to make it good. But
So,
anyway,
and that's what makes Warlock so good with Thaurissan because it gives that Warlock hero power gives you a huge amount of control over how fast you play the game. So it means that when you draw Thaurissan, you can play, you can use the effect of Thaurissan to the full without worrying about running out of cards.
yeah. Now,
Uh,
yeah.
and
So
so the other problem with Warlock is that you don't have a good removal for the huge boards of spiders and dudes and imps. But this expansion has done a lot to remedy that as well. So yeah, expect to be seeing a lot more Warlock.
now, the funny thing about the legendaries in the set is I think we're going to talk a decent amount about each one, so there's going to be a long haul. So anyway, are we done with Thorazan? Well, we're not really
Yeah.
done with Thorazan, but are we
Well,
done talking about it in a set
I
review?
suspect that we're going to be done with Thaurissan
Because
after.
I spent like 2 hours talking about him yesterday, because you can. He's that kind of card, you can just keep going.
Yeah, and there's going to
Uh,
be something we haven't even thought about that's going to be an even better application of Thaurissan. Some insane combo that
is
currently
only
costs 11
possible with
mana, but
Thorazan,
uh,
yeah. Leroy
yeah, so
combo.
people have talked about using it in the combo Warlock with Arcane Golem, Power of Warming, Faceless, so that you can
Give it
because you
tries.
always get 10 cards in your hand on turn 6 with that, and
And you always
you know,
draw your entire deck, so therefore Thorazan works. But yeah, anyway, so besides combo decks and yeah, weird stuff that we haven't even thought about yet, I think we're done with Thorazan for now, although you have not heard the last of this from us, I'm guessing.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're going to be seeing this card again a lot.
Yeah, so anyway, next, Rend Blackhand, a card which we've pretty much already seen because he's been around for a while. Now, before we get into the actual card that much, besides stat totals and such, before we talk about him, so he's a 7 mana 8/4 legendary. Battlecry, if you're holding a dragon, destroy a legendary minion. Now, before we get into this, there's actually a tab on this, which thankfully is further over, so you can see most of it. So this is the popular black hand targets that are not big game hunterable, because otherwise he's just a really expensive big game hunter that is a big game hunter target. Bit awkward. But anyway, so the non-big game hunterable targets are Antonidas, Alakir, Edwin Van Cleef, most of the time against good players, Gromash, almost none of the time, Harrison Jones, Kel'Thuzad, Loatheb, Ysera, Vojan, Tyrion, Black Knight, Toshli, Sneasel, Treader, Sylvanas, and the Troll Joe. So basically...
Capital Walker Show.
Capo Walker Joe. But anyway, so the point is there's a decent amount that it hits, but before we get into this, there is a problem with
yeah,
Rend
you can kill that
Blackhand.
Sylvanas with Rend. How amazing.
Oh my god, yes, and then you can big game hunter your Rend. Anyway, so the problem with Rend is that he gets big game hunted. However, there is a scenario which I did not foresee when I first talked about this card, which is that you can play Rend to kill his tempo play so that you get tempoed by his big game hunter, but they kind of cancel each other out, and then you can play your actual big game hunter target. I don't know if that's actually going to work, but that's the theory.
There's a couple of things about Rend, right? One thing to bear in mind is that you happen to be holding a dragon,
You mean to Rend in mind?
Um,
Alright, moving on.
One thing to Rend in Rend is Rend. Okay, so if you're holding Rend, if you're holding dragon, so you need to be holding dragon. Now I'm confused. So there's only a specific slice of decks that can even think about running Rend, because
they need an 8-drop dragon
having
or larger.
having enough dragons that are likely to be in your hand on turn 7. You also have to want to play a 7-mana big game hunter. The nice thing about big game hunter is that very rarely you need to use it before turn 7. And in fact, a lot of the time you want to save it for specifically turn 7. So the fact that you can't play Rend before turn 7 isn't that much bigger of a drawback.
Yeah, but then there's the flip side of things, which is that you can play it on big game hunter lets you play something else with it.
Yeah, and it lets you, further your own game plan rather than just playing as 8/4. But the thing about an 8/4 is an 8/4 is really really annoying and threatening, actually.
Also dies to swipe.
Especially because a lot of the time they might have played, for example, a lower Thebald with an empty board, or whatever, and then it's very difficult to deal with.
It answers Thorazan! It answers Thorazan!
It answers Thorazan, exactly, right? Play into Thorazan, which you obviously desperately need an answer to. And it's also very difficult to answer itself because, we talked a lot about why 4 health is bad. It's because of cards like True Silver and Deathbite, which you don't really want to be hitting Rend with. And things like Swipe, where, if the Druid is spending their turn 8 swiping Rend, hopefully they're not going to be able to develop something else, and it's going to completely ruin their turn. If you think about things like Baron Geddon, where a lot of the time, even though Baron Geddon only has 5 health, because it has a board clearing effect, you're often not a lot of time going to have the smaller things which you can trade up into the Baron Geddon to make that 5 health bad. And because you can't attack into it with weapons, really.
There is a difference between 4 and 5, though. That is notable. The difference between 4 and 5 is quite large.
Oh, it's pretty significant. I agree. But the number of times in which you are staring down that that 7/5, that 8/4, thinking, oh crap, how do I actually kill this? It's going to hit me in the face.
It's going to happen.
Rend is a lot more threatening than a big game hunter, and that's actually a big deal.
There is, obviously he's actually, weirdly enough, he's actually bad against Thorazan because it's like 2 mana big game hunter. Oh look, I still have effectively 6 mana because whatever I'm playing is reduced. So against Thorazan, not so much, but if you need to play it, you will. But the other thing about 4 health at this stage of the game is actually, we've been talking about Swipe and True Silver and things like that, but it also just dies to Frostbolt.
That's true.
Which is kind of annoying.
If it dies to Frostbolt Ping, it killed your opponent's last turn play. And
what happens if he just goes Frostbolt threat and then next turn just pings it and then plays something else?
But again, it probably killed something that was worth at least 6 mana. So.
Oh no, the point, you got value out of it. I'm just thinking how much of a threat is the 8/4? The effect is powerful because one of my arguments against
So the point about the 8/4 is that it demands an immediate answer every time. So it might disrupt your opponent's plans, even if
Yeah,
they actually just want, so even if they have to frostbolt ping it, that might completely screw up the rest of their turn.
that's
And they
true.
absolutely have to do it. And then if they don't have anything for it, you just win.
It is really bad
The
against
downside of
Mage
Ren,
in
obviously,
general.
is there are a lot of decks against which Ren is just bad.
Like,
Um,
Shaman has targets, but things like most decks would
Face
probably.
Hunter.
Oh, Face Hunter has literally zero targets, and you'll never play it anyway.
You can kill their Leroy.
Oh my! No, you can't, because it kills you.
Okay, yeah. Only ever come down in the final turn of the game. But and so if that is all right. So the question is, how big a chunk of the meta do decks which run few or zero legendaries have to be before Ren becomes bad?
Even like decks like Druid and things like that will probably most decks will only really have Loatheb and maybe Thorazan depending on the speed of the deck itself.
Yeah,
So realistically, you're dealing with what's probably going to be a one, maybe like not to mention in some of those decks which are playing Loatheb and the mid-rangey ones, they're probably only going to play Loatheb when they need it for the spell shutdown or if they just need to play it. And if they need to play it, then Blackhand's good. But if they just shut down all your AoE, you're probably dead. So Blackhand is like he's a powerful card, but there is a bit of a caveat
yeah.
here, which is that he's only good if you're one of the dragon decks that's playing a high mana curve on the dragons, because you're not playing the six. You're
Yeah.
not. It's not like you're playing Hungry Dragon and like 5-drop
Right.
dragons and then like a 6-drop. You're playing
That's
Chromagus. You're playing
that's a really good point.
Alexstrasza.
The other caveat
Yeah.
I wanted to add is that dragon decks are likely to be quite mid-rangey, and so having this 7 mana situational card stuck in your hand is not going to be that great.
Is it's going to be like Volcanic Drake but worse sometimes.
Um, okay, you can start talking about Chromagus. I'm just going to take a really quick break if that's all right.
All right,
Um,
sure. Anyway, so moving on to Chromagus, as I have lost my co-host. So moving on to Chromagus, 8 mana, 6/8 dragon. Now this is what I compared to Kel'Thuzad because he has the same stat total and same cost. But it says, and I have a Skype message which I forgot to turn the sounds down on, so I'm going to do that now. Okay. Anyway, so Chromagus, 8 mana, 6/8 dragon. Whenever you draw a card, put another copy of that in your hand. Now that's a copy of the card you drew. So what that means is if you draw a Spider Tank, you're going to draw 2. If you draw a Blackwing Corruptor, you're going to draw 2. If you, basically anything you can draw, you're going to draw a second copy. Now this does apply for any draw effect, not just the draw at the beginning of your turn. So it works with the Warlock Hero Power, it works with Sprint, things like that. Sprint is kind of funny where you draw 8, but I don't think that's going to come up that often. Now, earlier I mentioned that Chromagus would probably see play in things like Shaman, and Paladin also gets massive curves out of it because they do have a way of reducing its cost. But Chromagus is insane in Paladin now because of that card, but Shaman does have a way of using it, partly because if you play it off Thorazan, obviously, then it becomes 7 mana, which means you can curve into it. But it also means that if you play it later in the game as Shaman, you have multiple ways of using cheap removal.
and
So
I'm back.
alright, so basically I've just described the card, and I've just mentioned about Shaman and Paladin being the two classes that I think it's very, very, very good in, and Warlock Hero Power is also a thing. But basically, the Paladin have a way of curving into it more easily, but then Shaman does have a way of making up for its tempo loss. So the other thing is that Shaman is a draw engine, but the actual reason why I think Chromagus is very good in Shaman mid-rangey decks is because what happens is that if you have Dr. Boom, if you have the new 4-drop, which can be a big game hunter on an RNG, you have Dr. Boom, Neptulon, Chromagus at the top of your curve, every one of those cards requires a different way of removing it, which means you may actually just play like Chromagus after you've played your Neptulon, for example. Not Neptulon, like, actually, no, Neptulon if you play him on turn 10, which is when I usually play him. So I guess Neptulon's like the last one you'll play then. So if you play like Chromagus after Boom, then your opponent's kind of staring at it because he's thinking, hang on a sec, if you didn't big game hunter the Boom, which then dies to the Boom bots, if you used Hex on the Boom or something, or Polymorph, or any hard removal, you're staring at this dragon and you're thinking, how do I kill that? I just used my turn that would normally be a tempo loss for him to kill this Dr. Boom because Boom is amazing. But then if
Right.
you play it later on in the game, you've got lightning bolts, and if you play it off Thorazan, that's just dumb. That's
Uh,
basically the I sum up on that for
okay, so
Shaman.
I actually I think we're going to disagree on this one.
Okie dokie, bring it.
I really don't think Chromagus is that good. It has some stuff going for it. It's an 8 mana dragon. I think it's the only 8 mana dragon,
It
um,
is, yes, it is the only 8 mana dragon.
which is a fairly big deal, especially because with the Paladin card you can play the Paladin card on turn 5 and then play Chromagus on turn 6, which is pretty
That's amazing. That's an
pretty
insane
strong, right?
curve, yeah.
Because that's when you kind of get Chromagus out early enough that they might actually not be able to kill it. But the problem is, if it dies on the turn it came out, Chromagus was like basically an 8 mana Boulder for Stoker. Um,
That
and
that turned on your corruptors.
that's true. And that's actually really important. That it's less bad than most other 8 drops to have stuck in your hand because you have an enabler for all of your other stuff. But again, I think I would want to play for my late game dragon something that definitely immediately wins the game if it sticks, and probably wins the game even
Yeah.
if it doesn't stick, like Ysera or you know, Onyxia or Nefarian or
I don't think Ysera does not end the game faster than Chromagus. It has less attack and also like drawing 2 cards from your deck is less random and say in Shaman with so many burn spells now, compared to like the only Ysera Awakens or Nightmare.
right. But dream cards are obviously better than cards in your deck, right?
Most of the time, with the exception
Uh,
of Laughing Sister and debatably Emerald Drake
so
if
I
they
mean,
haven't played
there
Big
are
Game
some
Master yet.
ways in which you can leverage Chromagus on the turn that you play it.
Yeah, there
Um,
are. Handlock can use their hero power.
Actually, that's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about that.
The other thing is, I did talk to Brammerham about this, and he said that it might be worth trying a Control Warrior because there are, if the metagame's slow enough, then the Control Warrior
Mm.
gets into this weird phase in the game where they're just playing a win condition until one sticks. And then if Chromagus
Yeah,
sticks, you
but
just win because you just keep drawing
again, I
cards.
think there are better options like Ysera, like Sneasel Shredder, like just things that
Maybe
are much
Sneeds
less
is
susceptible to removal. And the thing about Shaman, right, is in Shaman you don't really want to be playing a huge top end of your curve because what Shaman is more about is about playing small, efficient, mid-ranging minions, having
I've
lots
been
of flexible
playing
spells, and then hero powering a lot,
I've
right?
been playing Boom, Alakir, Neptulon, and I tried Ragnaros instead of Alakir, and they were about as awkward as each other. But if you remove it altogether, you just can't do it. But you need some sort of non-big game hunterable target. That's why I
Yeah, okay,
think
so why don't it
Chromagus
play
might see some play
Kel'Thuzad,
there.
right? If Kel'Thuzad lives, then you win.
Kel'Thuzad is more conditional than Chromagus.
And sometimes, even if it,
Yeah,
well, even
he's
if
more
it succeeds,
powerful, but he's worse on his own.
yeah, but if you're, I mean, if you know, if you, okay, put it this way, if you play Kel'Thuzad and your opponent doesn't have a way to remove the Kel'Thuzad,
You
you still
win.
probably win. The difference is sometimes you win the turn you play Kel'Thuzad because you get to revive your, um,
Yeah, but we've seen
sort of,
in reality from playing Kel'Thuzad in Shaman it just doesn't work.
right. And I don't think Chromagus is better. I think it's worse.
Okay, there is actually one other argument I've got to throw at you, which is a dragon deck that does not have a big game hunter target.
Um, what class are you playing?
Probably Shaman. Because Shaman has access to ways of killing the bigger stuff more easily on tempo. So I'd
Um,
probably be playing either Shaman or Paladin because Paladin also has reduced costs.
I have two responses to that. One is that what's it called? The Shaman do have the new Shaman card, which if you have two in your deck, there's a 50% chance, well, slightly less than 50% chance, that you will have a big game hunter target at some point during the game anyway. Uh,
If you
and
draw both.
yeah, if you draw both, right? But we're talking about a long game here. That's why you're putting Chromagus in your deck to beat control decks. And I just
Yeah.
think that there's better late game options for Shaman by,
Um,
by a significant margin.
There might be. I mean, you've got Neptulon and Boom already. I just think that they
Exactly.
need an extra punch in the late game that we haven't really found yet for Shaman. It just hasn't
Um,
existed. Like they
Well, I think
do.
yeah, I think it's an interesting problem, right? Because you can't put too much late game into your shaman, otherwise it just gets too clunky in the early game when you want to be having efficient turns with all cheap spells.
That's why I'm thinking you
Um,
can run a dragon engine because it
you know,
basically holds off the early to mid game really easily.
Hot Form did try that deck was playing double Mana Tide and Bloodlust as its win conditions instead of late game stuff,
Interesting.
which I thought was a really interesting idea. Um, and he got number one legend with that on NA, I believe. Um, and so that's one way of going about it. Another way of going about it is, but I think if you're playing Shaman like a Druid, right, where you have playing big stuff on curve, I think you're doing it wrong because then you're not.
No, that's not the way I'm thinking. Like I'm thinking like because a lot of people make the mistake. Example for Neptulon. A lot of people don't play Neptulon because they play him on turn 7 and they think, hang on a sec, I can't do anything next turn. In my opinion, the correct way of playing that card is on turn 10. Because then you play it on turn 10, you deal with his board. You either Storm or Hex or something,
Play
and
Bluegill Warrior.
then you've got, or depending on what you get from, like you might get a Bluegill or something, or the point is you can Hex or Storm. And in the case of Chromagus, you just wait until you're getting into top deck mode, and because Shaman grinds their opponent to death, at least that's the way I play it. So you get to late game, you play Chromagus. This is when Kel'Thuzad would be way worse because you're just in top deck mode and it doesn't really work because like you don't have
The
anything
fact that
to
this happens,
activate.
by the way, the fact that exactly the thing you've just described happens is why I don't think Thaurissan will be like
You mean
particularly amazing in
Chromagus,
Shaman.
not Thorazan? Or is it
No,
Thorazan?
I'm talking about Thaurissan, right? Because you were saying how Thaurissan would be particularly good in Shaman, but the fact that this happens, that sometimes you're in top deck mode and then you top deck a Thaurissan and it's not as good.
Well, no,
Is
that well, the main thing is that in what's it called? Shaman is obviously going to change because you're getting access to more 2-for-1s. So it's going to be more your opponent is top decking unless you are. But the thing is, like, if you have, that's true. The thing is, if you have, I'm thinking of trying Chromagus because he has a draw engine and he's actually more threatening than previous draw engines. And Chromagus, along with Azure Drake, and then you can also run maybe 2 Hungry Dragons, so you have 4/4 drops in your deck, which is advised in my opinion. Or like, because you could deal with that. Like you could work that in if you've got like you have a dragon engine that's made of like 9 cards. You've got like 9 cards. You have 5 dragons in your deck, and then you've got corruptors and technicians. And I think you could make that work to the point when you just grind the game to a halt, and then Shaman is pretty much impossible to lose with once you get to that point.
okay, just let me ask you a question. If there was a card that was an 8 mana dragon, 6/8 battle card, draw card, would you play it?
Interesting. It's debatable, actually.
Right? Because that's the scenario for Chromagus if it lives for a turn.
I think I would. Like, Azure Drake is way stronger than it looks.
Yeah, but Azure Drake is a lot cheaper, and that's what you need in Shaman. You need cheap stuff and spell power and draw.
It kind of is just draw a card, but then you also get 2 of that card, which
Right, which sometimes
breaks
is
it
good.
down a bit.
Bad.
Well, in the case of Shaman, most of the cards you're top decking twice are going to be good, because all of your cards are 2-for-1s.
And burn. Having two burn cards is good. But also, it restricts your options.
Um,
But I think the thing about Chromagus is, like, a lot of the time you're not even going to get the one card because it's not going to live.
yeah, that's a point. I don't know. I think it's worth trying, though. Like, it definitely has
Yeah,
potential.
okay. But this is something that we can,
Um,
make a bet on. I bet that Chromagus will see almost no play in serious constructed.
yeah, I don't know if people, like, other people are even onto trying him out.
The only
Is it
unique
him
issue
or her?
is that it's an 8 mana 6/8 dragon, which is a pretty big deal. But
I mean, it's the other thing. I mean, one of the big pulls to it, and this is a really big one, is that it's a dragon for the top of the curve that doesn't die to Big Game Hunter. That's probably its single biggest pull. It is the only dragon in the game
yes,
on the
sir.
top end of the curve. All right, only dragon that doesn't immediately kill you when you play it. Because 9 mana and 8, there's a massive difference. We've seen this with
And
Ragnaros.
the other thing is that 6 attack is quite a lot more difficult to ignore because
Yeah.
they can't just like sludge belch him.
We've also seen this with like, yeah, we've seen this with Ysera before, where Ysera's like, oh my god, it wins the game, yes, but it's going to kill, like, your opponent will kill you before it kills them. Like, we've seen
Right.
this with 4 attack. So yeah, basically, it's out of the out of the dragons, it's an 8 mana top end one. It doesn't die to Big Game Hunter, which could be relevant. I'm gonna try it. I may be wrong on how good it is, but I think it's in the worth testing category. It's in the same category Kel'Thuzad was when it came out. It's in the worth testing, but difficult to evaluate in actual playtesting, in my opinion. Although you're on the Volcanic Drake train slightly, so.
So yeah, so it would be interesting to see which ones.
All right, so on to the other big dragon, Nefarian, 9 mana, 8/8. This seems to be the standard for 9 mana dragons, is the 8/8 stat total. Add 2 random spells from your opponent's class, not deck. Now, I thought this card was absolutely terrible, and I still kind of think it is. But after seeing what happened when it was played twice yesterday, it was completely ridiculous. Like, that may have just been lucky, but there was a Blessing of Kings and a Consecrate played on one side, which were both insane. Then there was a Flame Strike played by a Paladin.
That killed like
and then the
2
Echo
5/4s and 8/4s.
And then there was a misplay later on, but if you played Echo of Medivh correctly, you would have had 2 extra Aldors. Or something just ridiculous.
Okay, so yeah, so Nefarian is that it fits into the niche of you put it in your dragon deck so that it's like a way of having some late game gas.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically just like a big, expensive Ancient of Lore. Although it's slightly worse because there are an awful lot of very bad spells in the game.
Not if you're playing against Mage, but if you're playing against Paladin, you better be praying. Like, seriously.
Yeah. Because you can get Eye for an Eye, and you can get
any of the Paladin secrets.
Bestial Wrath, and
okay, Hunter has a couple bad ones. Basically,
there's actually a really ludicrous number.
I read through a lot of them, which were like, you realize that a lot of cards are bad, so they don't go in your deck, but would be fine if you got them just at a point in the game.
There's a couple like that, like
Naturalize, for example, and Ancestral Healing, Naturalize, Reincarnate, things like that. There's a lot that they're not good in a deck, but they're good just to randomly get. So there's a lot of exceptions to that, obviously, which increases. There's actually very few very bad spells, but then if you're playing as Hunter or Paladin, you're kind of like, come on. But then on the flip side of things, there's Consecrate, there's Hunter's Mark.
Yeah,
that's a thing.
So the question is, as your curve topper, is Nefarian better than something like Ysera or Alexstrasza or Onyxian?
I'm going to come back to this, but I'm going to say that in Shaman or Paladin, it's at its best, because they, as I said, like Paladin has the cost reduction for dragons, and Shaman is still looking for a sustainable punch late game. So
right. The other thing is, so some classes can use the spells better than others if you play.
That is true.
Already Violet Teacher, or you've got a lot of spell power like Shaman does.
Imagine Druid with a Flame Strike.
Quite. So that's the good thing about Nefarian. The problem with Nefarian, the nice thing about Nefarian in comparison to those other late game legendaries is it's much harder to ignore than Ysera.
He's worse than Alexstrasza, in my opinion.
It is somewhat big game hunterable though. So it's about
you would play it with Rend Blackhand. So I'm gonna throw that out there. The Chromagus is like, if you were playing him. Playing it with Rend Blackhand depends on how many big game hunter targets you have, but if you're playing Nefarian, you're playing Blackhand. Like, that seems to be the way that's going.
Yeah, you have to already be playing quite a lot of BGH targets for Nefarian to be worth it.
Like,
also, I just don't think Nefarian is.
I don't think it's strong enough.
Just because it's got competition, and additionally, obviously, all of the 9-man dragons, with the possible exception of Alexstrasza, have the caveat that in a pretty large chunk of the matchups, they are just going to be almost useless.
Yeah, that's just the way it works. I mean, it's not even like with Chromagus, where he has a unique stat total and also a cost that's lower than normal on the dragon type. Nefarian is just like, it's just an effect on a 9-mana 8/8 dragon, which we've seen like 5 times already. So you have to compare the effects, and once you have direct comparison, it's much easier to just kind of say no.
Yeah, most of the time, unless you get to go like Nefarian, Prep, Consecrate,
Okay,
You're just going to be spending your turn playing an 8/8,
that's
and at that
true.
stage of the game, it might make you lose.
Now, are you ready for the last neutral card and arguably the funniest?
Oh, this is brilliant.
Sorry, I need to pronounce this. The Major. No, no, don't help me. Majordomo Executus. There's a Roman name there, I think.
I like Major Domo Executus, but
Major Dormu, yes. No, no, we need to
Doma.
call him Major
Doma.
Dormu because he's as trolly as Nosdormu. So he's Major
Oh,
Dormu. So anyway, basically what he does is he's a 9 mana, 9/7. Nice Malorn stats there. But anyway, 9 mana, 9/7 legendary. With Death Rattle, replace your hero with Ragnaros the Fire Lord. They found a way of fiddling him in there somewhere, even though he's already in the game. So, what does he do? Basically, when he replaces your hero, you have 8 maximum life. Ugh. You have 8 max life, and your hero power becomes Ragnaros' end of turn effect. This is one of the funniest cards I have ever seen in the entire game, but it is also completely terrible. But that's not the point. The point is that it's flashy and hilarious to watch. It was on the stream just by accident almost last time. The funniest thing was, if you watch the reveal of Jaraxxus, which was almost scripted because the druid played really badly, deliberately. In this case, it wasn't even the case because you could see that the streamers were the ones facing it, not having it. So Ragnaros ended up coming down and barely won the game, and it was super close. But the problem with him is that you're going to play this Executus, and then it's going to get big game hunted, and you're going to get fireballed.
yeah, I mean, right. The problem is so people have problems with Jiraxxus already. Uh, having to play the Jiraxxus and then 15 health is not always enough, like against a druid, to be able to stay alive long enough for your amazing new hero power to win the game. Executus is a bit different in the fact that you don't lose quite as much tempo when you play it because you get the 9/7 out. And the nice thing about that is that sometimes you can make it die on your turn, and then you get the hero power immediately and use it. But being at 8 health and just dying to like swipes and eviscerates and
You know,
things like
I
that.
want to see. I want to see someone who had like Thorazan out for 2 turns or something ridiculous, go like Executus, big game hunter, my own Executus, hero power for lethal. I want to see
Yes,
this.
okay.
Also,
Um,
before I forget, this is something I want to see on Funny Lucky Moments at some point if it ever happens. Jaraxxus versus Nefarian, and he gets Sacrificial Pact.
oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. That's the thing that can happen.
But anyway,
Um,
continue. Just had to put that
it's
out
actually
there.
quite likely because Warlock doesn't have that many spells.
Yeah,
Uh,
higher chance than
so
most.
something like a 10% chance.
Ugh, that's
Um,
scary.
Executus,
He has to
yeah,
die. That's the problem. And even then, if he does die, you have such little HP.
yeah.
Like,
So it's again, you can think about it like Jiraxxus, right? Jiraxxus is playable because it wins you the game in a large fraction of the times that you play it, just on the spot. And I think even against a priest where they have like no burst, they might have enough burst to kill your 8 health Ragnaros. And if you're not getting the Ragnaros out, then what's the point of
it's also random. Like, where you don't get to direct the 8 damage.
yeah,
So that's a problem. And it's. I mean, it's supposed to be a flashy card. It's not supposed to be, like, super powerful. It's kind of like the Baron Rivendare of the set. No, no, it's more like Thaddeus. And it's more like Thaddeus. Like,
yeah,
the whole Thaddeus combo. That's what he's supposed to be. And I appreciate it because it's hilarious. But, yeah, it's really funny. And when this comes out, everyone is going to try it out once. It's just too
yeah.
much fun to not try it. Like, it's too much
It's
fun
go
to just like not
it's
try
going
it.
in
But
my
it's
Randuin Rin deck, obviously.
not, the funny thing is, it's like it's at face value, it's not random. And then when Ragnarok's replaced, you think it's not random, but then your hero power is. It's
Yeah.
like it is in fact random. It's really funny. The other thing is that they found a way to make Ragnaros immune to Big Game Hunter.
Sorry. The one thing that I did want to say about Executus is it does. Sorry. The one thing that you can do with it is in Mage, um, because
You,
when
are
you
you
get the
talking about
Ragnaros,
Freeze Mage?
it destroys your armor, but I'm not talking about freeze mage in particular,
Okay.
but just generally because you have ice block, so you can plausibly play Executus
We did
with,
talk about this with James, who's the resident freeze mage player, but basically the
and
problem
also
is it's so inefficient.
yeah, and you have the possibility that you can Alexstrasza yourself, and yeah, I mean, so maybe not in freeze mage, but in the kind of very controlly giant sea mage that's
Think
been
about it this
sort of
way:
knocking around but not quite playable for a long time.
would you rather play Alexstrasza on your opponent and then kill him next turn, or would you rather play Executus, hope he dies without being silenced, and then hope he doesn't kill you immediately?
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate problem that all of these decks run into is that building a deck that can always beat other control decks is not always good enough if you just get completely wrecked by most aggro mid-range strategies. And that's the issue that Giants Mage has always had.
Is it just gets
And
destroyed by aggro? Yeah.
this just makes it,
So
exacerbates the issue. So,
I mean, personally, I don't think that Executus will ever see competitive play.
no, I agree with you.
And if someone tries to take it super seriously and play it competitively, you're kind of ruining the fun of the card. It's like whoever comes up, if anyone breaks Grim Patron, they better be laughing like an evil genius while playing it and killing people with it, because otherwise I will be disappointed. It's the same with Executus.
Oh, yeah, I think
Like,
the chance of it getting broken is slightly less high there.
yeah, it's slightly less high, but the point is that like you need, if you're winning with that card, you need to be extremely happy, and you need to be doing it because you enjoy playing the game. Like if you're doing it as super, I'm just going to win as much as possible and highest win rates, and you're trying to do it with like Ragnaros as your hero, I think you're doing it wrong. So I'll put it that way. Although to be fair, you can put Dragon Egg in that deck as well, just to kind of make an omelet. But anyway, I think that's a decent note to end on for the neutrals. So I guess like we didn't actually have that many disagreements. We had like Volcanic Drake, which you for some reason think we'll see play,
And Chromagus.
and Chromagus, which I think will see play. Actually, I don't even know in my opinion. So all
Oh,
right,
did we have
I will
um,
try it, and I'm probably going to be wrong, but I will have a lot of fun doing it.
as a footnote? Did we have a final verdict on Rend?
Kind of. Like, I think we just said that. I think we just said the effect is powerful, but you need to play it in a deck with high drop dragon, and even then, it's still meta dependent.
Yeah, I think it's just very meta dependent, and in the matchups when it's bad, it's like really bad. Like if you
Doesn't
think
it
about
also
how,
get a bit awkward where if Ren Blackhand becomes a popular big game hunter at like absorb target, people are just going to start playing two.
yeah, that's true.
That's
But I think,
happened before.
and if there are enough decks against which Big Game Hunter is bad, then
Can,
probably won't be enough decks against
can we
Red.
agree that the best legendary is Thorazan though?
Oh yeah, I don't think
By
there's any
far. Like
about that.
no contest. However, best
No, best
neutral.
legendary is Troxel.
But alright, best neutral though, is it still Thorazan? I think it is. Also,
Uh, by far.
for anyone who's paying attention, how many times have we said Thorazan in different ways?
Thorasan.
Is it
It's an S.
Thorasan? Is it?
Thorasan.
It's not Thorazan? Or is it
That is,
Thorasian? I'm just going to call him Emperor. He has a sick hammer. But anyway, so that's about going to do it for the neutral cards. So thanks for joining me for the first part of the set review. Thanks for coming on, Dapper.
thank you, Jotto.
Yep, we're going to go on to the class cards, which will be out tomorrow. So we will see you then. Bounce House and Jotto and Dapper. Signing off.